Well, I want to welcome you to the Basilica of St. Joseph Proto Cathedral. That is a big name for a big church. It was the first cathedral built west of the Allegheny Mountains, in the first diocese west of the Allegheny Mountains, the Diocese of Bardstown. As a historian, I love facts and I love dates, but all of that's important when you think about where we came from, what we did, our ancestors did, to get us to this point. This is a beautiful cathedral in the wilderness. There was a book written about Cathedral in the Wilderness, and it was written about this particular church. A brick church with wooden columns, with early settlers giving their time, materials, and money to the building of this church. Now, all those little bits and pieces I'm going to try to share with you in talking about the building, the rebuilding, and the continued use of the Basilica of St. Joseph Proto Cathedral. We have to go back to 1808. At that point is when the Diocese of Bardstown was formed, along with New York, Philadelphia, and Boston. Needless to say, we've never been connected with those other three communities in the same way. But Bardstown was centrally located for the Catholic settlements all out in the West. In the West we're talking about, it's not the Wild West across the Mississippi, but it was the west of Kentucky and Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, Arkansas, Tennessee. We were the wide open West in the early 1800s. Benedict Joseph Flagey would be the man chosen to be the first bishop of Bardstown. And I say the man, he was not a young man. He was a native of Bayonne, France, and he was a teacher. He was a member of the Sulpician order of priests, which is a teaching order. And this is what he would actually leave as his legacy here in Kentucky. He left lots of schools and opportunities for education. But back again, 1808, the Diocese of Bardstown. We were very excited to have a diocese formed, and we were really excited to have Bardstown chosen to be the seat of that diocese. Well, now Bishop Flagey, who was not bishop at that point, but Father Flagey, was not so excited. He really wasn't sure he wanted to be a bishop. And he wrote letters, and he talked to his superiors, and he delayed his consecration as bishop. But by 1810, he had been consecrated, and he was planning to come to his new seat of his diocese. Now, you understand that this cathedral was not here then. It was just a dream in his mind. All bishops have to have a cathedral. This would become his first cathedral. He arrived in Kentucky in 1811. He was immediately greeted by the Catholic settlers. They had been told he was coming, and they were very excited about it. And all 8 of the Catholics who lived in the city of Bardstown, or I should say the town of Bardstown, came to greet him as he came riding on a wagon from Louisville. Immediately after he had gotten settled in the area, not just Bardstown, but in Marion County and in the area which is now Marion County, and all, he started meeting with congregations. They would have their mass, and then he would pass a paper. Now, this paper wasn't a newsletter. It was a paper to be signed with pledges. It was called a subscription list. And a subscription list is just that. To subscribe means to sign under. And the congregation members who wanted to donate toward the building of a cathedral in Bardstown, Kentucky, signed their name and how much they would donate. You had the farmer who donated a wagon and a horse and a driver for hauling. You had the lawyer who donated professional services. You had a store owner who donated $100 in merchandise, and all down through here. Now, this was not, as anyone who's built a church realizes, it takes time to gather the funds, make the plans and all, in the same way with this cathedral. The cathedral was designed by John Rogers, a native of Ireland who came from Baltimore, who came here to help Bishop Flagey build churches. He was a very experienced architect and a very faithful Catholic. He helped Flagey on St. Thomas Church right outside of Bardstown, and he started drawing the plans for this one. Flagey was a very good priest, a good bishop, a very faithful Catholic, but he didn't have a lot of confidence in his business dealings. And in his letters, he talks over and over about, will this building be beautiful? Will he have the funds to pay for it and all? So the anxiety he had stayed with him all the time when he was working, trying to make this happen. We are inside a completed cathedral, a cathedral that's been used for almost 200 years. In August 8th of 2019, this church will be 200 years old. We are celebrating this year, 2016, the 200th anniversary of the laying of the cornerstone. And the cornerstone, we'll show you a picture of a little later, was very interesting in that it was carved away from the rock. There is a cross in it, very simple cross. And a lot of work took to carve the stone away from it. And so it wasn't carved into the stone, but the stone was carved away from it. But that was the cornerstone of the cathedral. Bishop Flagey, meeting with John Rogers and others, determined that they would lay the cornerstone on July 16th of 1816. A lot of ceremony, we had lots of clergy, we had Protestants, we had Catholics, we had agnostics, we had atheists, we had everything here. They were interested, it was entertaining, it was something big for Bardstown. Lexington wanted the cathedral, Louisville wanted the cathedral, but Bardstown had been chosen to have it. Within 25 miles in every direction of Bardstown, there were early Catholic settlers, families from Baltimore area, from Maryland, coming here 20 years before, settling here, raising their children, all in the faith. Well, John Rogers determined his design would be a brick building. It would be made, of course, locally made bricks. They went out into Mother Nature's bounty to get the materials to build this church. They would start making brick from the local clay. They would make 989,000 brick. Almost 1 million brick would go into this building. They went into the woods of Kentucky, into the beautiful forest that many of the early settlers had already taken virgin lumber out of to build log buildings and to build brick and stone ones. And they went out into the forest of Kentucky and they cut down huge, when I say huge, 40 feet long logs would go into this building as the support, as the columns. Now these logs were squared on each end so they could be handled. People ask me today, why did they square them? They're round in the middle. If you've ever tried to pick up a roll of carpet, you'll understand you need an edge. You need a square or a flat edge in order to lever, to move something. And they had the same problem. So they squared the bottom and they squared the top and they connected them with timbers, large timbers. The forest of Kentucky provided half of the building material for this cathedral. Wooden floor joists, wooden floors, wooden columns, wooden roof joists. People who had donated their expertise, the carpenters, the bricklayers, the different ones who may not have even been trained in that particular craft, were taught how to do it. John Rogers was a master in plaster work. When we look at the columns today, the very tops of them, what they call the capitals, there is a letter written by Flagey that talks about John Rogers setting the capitals on the columns, which meant he took and set the plaster feather and acanthus leaf designs, that he applied them with more plaster, and they're still up there almost 200 years later. We still are looking at them. Now, needless to say, they've had to been repaired time and again, but they're still there, an example of the expertise and the desire to create something lasting. Back to our columns. When we're building a brick building, you have to have scaffolding. You cannot work off a ladder laying brick. Well, they built their scaffolding into the wall as they were going up. And as they laid the brick, they continued on up, and when they finished the wall, they would take the support for the scaffolding out and put a brick in where the hole was. And even today, if you look closely, you can see lines of brick that you can tell the mortar is not as even as the other bricks. So you know that that brick had been put in later. They're building the exterior walls, while inside here, they're starting to raise the columns that are going to hold the ceiling joists and the roof. But they have to attach those columns into the brick wall that's being created. Now, this was quite a construction effort. Even today, if we tried to reproduce it today without using modern equipment, to me, it would be almost impossible. In raising these heavy timbers and all of the connecting pieces that will tie them together, they were using ropes and pulleys and probably the muscle of either horses, mules, or oxen. Humans would have a hard time trying to put enough weight, enough muscle behind these very heavy timbers. Even though the yellow poplar tree, which they were using, is lighter in weight than oak or walnut, it would still be quite a project to raise it up and to hold it while you're attaching all these side pieces. Again, a cathedral is a work for the Lord, and maybe there was some divine intervention there in making things work. At least John Rogers was quite an architect and quite a craftsman, so he probably had either figured this all out ahead of time, or at least he had people who helped him figure it out. We're sitting here now in a finished church. Try to imagine the wooden columns sitting on rock walls, because the foundation was made of Kentucky rock. The inside walls that hold these columns and the main aisle here are unmortared stone. There's a picture that I found that showed that there's no mortar holding that stone together. It's all weight laid on top of each other. And underneath each of these columns, it gets wider. It's a much bigger pile of stone to hold that weight. The building slowly kept going up. Bricks were made over and over. They were paying $6 a hundred. No, not 100. $6 a thousand for bricks. Now, that's hard to believe today. Of course, $6 bought quite a bit more in 1816 and 17 than today. But the idea that they were making bricks over and over and curing them and firing them and then starting to stack them up ready to be used in the building. It began in July of 1816. The completed building, and I say completed with a little asterisk there, I'll finish that story in a minute, but the completed building finished to be used was August of 1819, 3 years in the building. Now, a constant building did not happen. You know yourself, the weather will slow things down. In this case, it was lack of funds. They had the promises from many people, and they had money from many people, but sometimes the money wasn't coming as fast. They had to wait until they gathered it up again in order to go buy more materials or buy nails or the workmanship of the people. So it was a slow process. The wooden columns have gone up. They're starting to tie them into the brick walls. The roof rafters are going up. The flooring is going down. Everyone sees what's going to be here. Everyone's excited. And I'm sure many people in this community came to watch the building going on, because it was the biggest thing to happen in the community of Bardstown in the late 1860s, 18 teens.